Hi, this is Jessica with cutesy-crafts.com. Today I'm going to teach you how to cross stitch. So first we'll start out with our supplies. You'll need embroidery floss in several different colors. Most cross stitch patterns use DMC embroidery floss colors, and you can see the code right there for what color you're using. You'll also need an embroidery hoop. There are several different kinds on the market you can use. This one is a wooden hoop. You'll need some sharp embroidery scissors. You'll also need a cross stitch needle or tapestry needle, and then you'll need some fabric. What I'm going to be showing you how to use today, which is the most common for counted cross stitch, is called Aida cloth. And you can see it just has all these little holes in it that'll help you with your counting out the X's on your cross stitch pattern. This one is Zweigart brand, which is very soft and smooth, unlike other cheaper brands of Aida cloth. And there are different counts of Aida cloth. So the count refers to the number of holes per inch of fabric. So this is a 14 count fabric. So that means within 1 inch, there's going to be 14 holes across in one direction. Other common counts for Aida are 16 and 18. So the bigger the number you use, the more holes there are going to be, which means that your pattern will turn out smaller in the end. 14 count Aida is the most common. And then you're going to need whatever pattern you're using. Right here you'll see the different fabric counts, the design sizes that those would make. Remember that a bigger count fabric is going to make a smaller design size. It'll tell you what stitches are used. A lot of times, like in this pattern, you'll also use a back stitch and a French knot, which I will teach you in a different tutorial. This one is nice and tells you what fabric they used to stitch the sample on here. And then you'll have a chart similar to this that shows the symbols used. This one has DMC colored floss and anchor, so you could use either one. Shows you the name of the color and how many stitches of each color you're doing, so that can help you determine how much embroidery floss you need for each one. Down here it tells you how many strands of floss you need to use for each stitch. So for the cross stitch, 2 strands, back stitch, 1 strand, French knot, 2 strands. And then here it'll tell you what each color is going to be used for. So here we have the X, means cross stitch. That's the symbol for that. The back stitch, you'll find symbols and colors for that here. And then French knot, we can see that only our pewter gray is going to have a French knot, and that's what our symbol will look like when we use that. First thing you want to do before starting out is make sure that your fabric doesn't fray on the edges. Aida cloth frays really easily, so this one came with a selvage edge here, which isn't going to fray. And then the fabric I bought came already serged on the edge, so that I don't have to worry about. But then I had to cut these raw edges, so I just went ahead and zigzag stitched those on my sewing machine. If you don't have a sewing machine or don't know how to zigzag stitch, you can also just use a piece of masking tape and fold that over the entire edge of your fabric to keep it from fraying. Next, we want to find the middle of our fabric so that we know where to start the design. So to do that, all we simply do is fold it in half. And this doesn't have any dots on it, so I'm not going to include that in my folding in half. And then fold that in half again. So then we know about right here is middle, and I'm going to take my needle and I'm just going to mark that spot. And it doesn't have to be exact unless you don't have any. You should have extra fabric around the edge. Make sure that you include that in your calculations for how big of a piece of fabric that you have. So we're starting about there at middle. So now that I have center marked, and I know it's the part where the needle's going in through the bottom, we need to hoop up our fabric. So unscrew the top of your hoop, put the middle part at the bottom of the fabric, and then I like to tighten it just a little bit and only put it on about halfway. So you can see I still have some room here. And then what I like to do is tighten it a little bit more. And then push it down the rest of the way. And then tighten it until you can't turn it anymore easily. And then it should be pretty tight in there. And then you can see on my chart it gives me a line here, a red line that's the middle, and there's an arrow, and then there's an arrow up here that tells me where the middle is that way. So I can use that to figure out where middle is, and it's on this house. So we want to start our stitching in this area so that we have a reference point to then stitch everything else around, and we don't have to count out squares. So normally, since this is the center of our pattern, this window here, and you do 3 of each stitch, a cross stitch in each row, but this is too light of a color for me to show in the video, so I'm actually going to skip down to the door here. And to do that, and in case you want to do this on your own pattern, what I have to do is start from center on my pattern and then just count down the same amount of squares as it is from the top of that window, which is center of my pattern, because I have center of pattern marked here. So I'm going to count down the amount of squares until I get to the door. You don't have to do that if you're just starting in the middle, so don't worry about it if you're able to do that. So you can see on the top of the door, I can see that these blue squares are all marked with a left pointing arrow in a blue color. So then I go to my chart on the back here so we can see what color thread to start out with. And my arrow pointing to the left, that's dark blue, says I'm going to use DMC 807. So I find that color, it says DMC 807 on the bottom here. And we're going to thread this on our needle. Find the end of my embroidery floss and pull about the length from the tip of my fingers to my elbow. So snip off that amount. And then remember on our chart here, it says that when we use cross stitch, you're going to use 2 strands. And I'll tell you that that is the most common. And what that means is embroidery floss is 1 strand of thread made up of 6 smaller strands. So when it tells you that you only want 2 strands, that means you need to separate the embroidery floss, and we're going to pull out the 2 strands, which is the amount that we need, and just pull that out like this. I keep smoothing it like that to make sure it doesn't tangle. And then you have your 2 strands here, and then you have 4 strands that you can use and separate later for when you run out of this. If you're having difficulty threading your needle, you can wet the thread with a little bit of water, or you can lick it like I know a lot of people do. And then I also like to start with just a fresh cut on the end so that both are the same size, both strands here. And the needle eye for these tapestry and cross stitch needles is pretty big, so it's pretty easy to get in there. And then you want to pull that through about 4 or 5 inches and then make it go the same direction as the rest of your embroidery floss. And we're not going to be tying a knot or anything in the end. I'll show you how to secure once we start stitching. Okay, just before we get started working on the pattern, I'm going to show you how to do a basic cross stitch on this setup here. So on cross stitch diagrams, you'll see squares, and the squares are just representing every 4 dots. So 4 dots makes a square. And when we do our cross stitch, we start our stitch at the bottom left-hand corner of the square. Pull that through and leave a tail on the back. Next, you'll want to come up to the right and add a diagonal. So we're going into the top right hole. Bring your needle down. And you want to pull that, make sure it's flat, but don't pull too tight, especially since we have that loose tail in the back. And then to secure that tail, we're going to turn it over. We're leaving a tail of about just like an inch or 2 in the back. You don't want to waste too much floss. And I kind of brush off to the side in the direction that my stitch is going to be going. We're on the back of our work. So now I'm going to push the needle down into, this is the bottom right hole here, and over this thread here. So pull that through, and you'll see a little stitch that kind of just tacks that down there. And then you can turn the work back over. And then to finish the X, we're going to take our needle over the top of that stitch, to the top left hole and pull that down. Now there's a different way to do those in a row that I will be showing you after this, but one more time I just want to show you what a single cross stitch looks like. Bringing our needle up on the bottom left hand corner, down on the top right, up on the bottom right, and down on the top left. So you want to make sure that every time you make a stitch that you're doing that in the same motion. That way the stitch that goes from left to right, from bottom left to top right, is underneath the one that goes from bottom right to top left. And that consistency is going to be very important when you are working on a large project. So you can see here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares of blue in a line, and that's how we're going to read our pattern, is in colored sections from left to right. So I have a whole line of blue right there that I'm going to start on. I have my needle threaded with 2 strands of embroidery floss. I've got my new spot marked right there. I'm going to take this needle out, and you can see the hole's a little bit bigger. You might not be able to see, but I can see that that hole's a little bigger, so it saved my spot. Bring my needle up through the back. Now I'm going to take a diagonal stitch, so I'm in this hole here at the bottom, and I'm going to go from left to right up at a diagonal to make the first part of my cross stitch, and pull that down, but don't pull it too tightly. So then what you could do is make the other half of your X by bringing your needle up here and then back down here. But since I have a whole row of stitches to do here, I'm going to make the first part of my stitches from left to right all the way across going one direction, and then I'll come back and make the other half of the X going the opposite direction, and I'll show you how. I'm going to turn it over just so you can see that this thread here is going under the stitch that we're creating on the back. And then I know that I'm bringing my needle down just below where that one above was coming up. And that helps secure this thread here. So now I'm back on the front of my project, and remember we're making 7 across. So I'm gonna make another diagonal line, which is the first part of my second X. We're only making the ones that are going that direction first. And then again, I'll turn over my work just so that I can see that I'm going over this thread here. Normally I don't turn the work over and over again, only at the beginning. Bring my needle down to the hole below, over this thread here to help secure it. Back on the front, make another diagonal from left to right. And then one more time, turning it over to the back to make sure that we're covering this thread. So we'll do one more stitch like that. And then I want to get rid of this tail here. So I'm going to snip it just off there, close to that last stitch there. And then we can concentrate all efforts on the front here, making our cross stitch. So now we've got 3 stitches securing my tail in the back, and we can continue because we're making 7 in this row. Bring your needle up in the hole below, and then up at a diagonal. Below that one, up at a diagonal. Now I can tell that my thread is starting to get a little bit curled up. And when that happens, it's a good idea to just drop your needle and let it dangle underneath your work and let it spin, so that way you don't start to get knots as you're stitching. All right, and then to make the other half of the X's going this direction, we start at the bottom, just as if we were going to make another stitch going that way. But instead of going up and to the right, we're going to go up and to the left. And you'll see that my needle goes into the same hole that this one next to it went down into also. So they'll share a hole there. And now we have our first completed cross stitch right there. Bring your needle up at the bottom of this one, and then down diagonal up and to the left of that one to make our second cross stitch. Up and to the left, and continue that all the way down the line until you have made cross stitches out of all of those lines. And again, just remember that you don't pull too tightly, otherwise you're gonna distort the fabric and make these holes in the fabric even bigger than they already are, and you're not gonna get the pretty full X's like you do if you don't pull too tightly. And then say you're finished using a color of thread. To secure that, you want to turn your work over. We're going to take our needle and just run it under about 3 of those stitches on the back. Just a straight line of stitches. Make sure you're not poking your needle through to the front at all. Run that under and then snip off the excess thread. The back should look nice and neat. So sorry to jump around a little bit. You can see I've already done the whole middle portion of this pattern now, and I'm starting on this bottom here, but I remembered as I was doing this that there was something that I needed to mention. So when you are stitching, so say I'm stitching up here, and then say I want to start somewhere over here. It's going to be really hard, first of all, to count the number of squares. I double, triple, quadruple check my counting. That's what I had to do to go from kind of this area here. I started on her basket and counted down and started with this topmost spot here, but I literally counted that like 3 times because I am prone to miscounting. So if you can avoid that and work from, so we started on the door, work from that point outward, it's the best thing to do. Obviously, there's going to be times where you can't avoid that, like here, where you're just going to have to count down the number of spaces. Another thing that I want to talk about is, so say I'm stitching here and I have to start in a new area, even if it's just a small jump, say from like here to here, you don't want to just stop here and then start stitching. Say I'm going to bring my needle then up over here, because now there's this line in the back and you probably can't see it, but I can see it, and you can see it through these holes here because there's nothing filling those holes. So anytime you have a blank space that you're leaving, like in between these fences or anything like that, you don't want to skip over that area. Just stop your thread and start a new one, or you're going to be able to see just a little shadow of it through the open holes in the back. And you also don't want to make super large leaps even across the back, so I wouldn't want to be starting over here doing these 2 and then go over here. You're going to waste thread, and you're also just going to have a really untidy back. So you can see I've done a little skipping around on this wreath here, but it was just a short distance. Short distances are fine as long as they're going to be covered by more stitches on the front. And when you're done stitching for the day, this is just one more important tip. Make sure that you take the hoop off, so that way you will always have just a mark here from your hoop anytime you put it on. A lot of people like to use scroll frames instead that kind of hold it from the sides, but taking it off at the end of the day just prevents that from being a really, really stuck in line. So that's it for our cross stitch tutorial for the day. I will be coming back to show, once I get to the part how to do the back stitch, which are going to be those lines there, and then frequently words are done in a back stitch. And then I'll also show how to do a French knot, which is the little eye on the bird here. I'm not sure if they're anywhere else on this pattern, but I'll do a video that shows how to do both of those things in the future. Head over to cutesy-crafts.com for more fun craft ideas, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video.